Welcome back. Bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to do a fun little book recommendation tag. So today I'm going to be recommending you 8 different books, but this is a original book recommendation tag that I have made for the Shades of Magic series by V.E.Schwab in anticipation, if you will, of the new Fragile Threads of Power book coming out, which is a continuation of the original trilogy. I thought it would be fun to do a little book tag, and currently there is a read-along going for the original Shades of Magic trilogy, hosted by Elliot Brooks, with many other booktubers, which all of them will be linked in the description down below. And of course, they are all going to be tagged, so hopefully all of the people that are participating in that read along with me will also do this fun little book tag. If you don't know, Shades of Magic is an adult fantasy series by V.E.Schwab. It is a fast-paced, quite dark, but not like overly graphically dark, but if you stop and think about pretty much any of the situations that our characters end up in, pretty dark series, and it's just kind of also a lot of fun. There is really cool magic. There's basically 2 different magic systems. There's kind of this more traditional elemental based magic system where people can control 1, 2, 3 elements, be that fire, earth, air, that kind of thing. And then there are also these special people that are born that are known as the Antari, which are basically blood mages, where they are very strong in elemental magic, but they also can use their blood and certain phrases that are almost like Latin-esque sounding to perform spells. And so that is where the inspiration for this book tag came from. I chose 8 of the different blood spells from the Antari to kind of theme this book tag around. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the first one, which is Travars, which they use to travel between worlds, because in this series there are parallel worlds that are all kind of connected at this central focal point of London. The Antari can kind of shift between these different worlds. And so for this, I'm going to recommend a book or series that makes me feel like I've been transported to another world. And for this one, I'm going to be the most basic of basic, and I'm going to say Lord of the Rings. I recently reread this with the amazing audiobooks narrated by Andy Serkis. And those are also, by the way, like the only way to ever experience this story ever again, because they are fantastic. But I know people always make fun of Tolkien for being overly descriptive, but for me, the overly descriptive comes in the form of describing like the mist through the trees, and it kind of gives me more evocative atmosphere over just like description, whereas something like Wheel of Time, where it's describing like clothes that I don't really care about, doesn't have that same kind of evocative imagery for me. Tolkien really makes me feel like I'm in this world, just seeing these creepy forests and traveling with friends, and so that is a series that definitely transports me to a whole different world. The next prompt is Hasari, which is to heal. And this is a book or series that healed you, gave you catharsis, or helped you escape from your real life when you really needed it. And so for me, I kind of grew up in a tumultuous home, shall we say. It wasn't the best childhood. And I always loved reading, and reading was really my escape from everything. And so one of the first books that I remember really like escaping into was Time Cat by Lloyd Alexander. It's this really fun middle grade, I would say, series where our 2 characters kind of travel around to different historical places with this magical like Egyptian cat that can like teleport them through time. So they go to ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and they just have kind of this fun adventure. And I just remember being so like absorbed into that book, and it's just one of my favorite books growing up. I need to reread it really, because I haven't read it in a very long time, but I just have such fond memories and nostalgia for that book, and I just remember it being the ultimate escape. So if you like cats, if you like history, if you like fun middle grade, then I would really say that you should check out Time Cat. The next one is Tascen, which is to travel within the same world. And for this one, I am going to recommend a book or series that is set in our real world, or a version of it. And so for me, when I think of this kind of prompt, it immediately screams urban fantasy. And so obviously, if you've been here for any amount of time, you know that I am a long time stan of the Laurel K. Hamilton works. So be that Mary Gentry, be that Anita Blake. Those are both set in versions of our world. Mary Gentry's on the West Coast of the United States, kind of in LA doing a private detective thing, and she is a fairy princess, and the fairies are messed up. So if you like really creepy fairies, you like smutty good times that are also a little bit questionable and a little bit like weird, then Mary Gentry's a lot of fun. It's really great. It's a lot more fantasy romance. And then there's the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series, which starts off as kind of like a serialized mystery fiction almost, where we're following Anita Blake, who is a legal vampire executioner who is on retainer with the local police force as their preternatural expert, because she also has a degree in preternatural biology. She is also a animator who can raise the dead for a living, and so we kind of follow her around on these different cases as she helps the police. It does dip more and more into fantasy romance, especially for a couple books in the middle, but the most recent books we've kind of shifted back towards more murder mystery of the week. And so it's just, I've been reading these books since probably junior high, and I think she's been writing them since the early 90s. So I would imagine that some parts of them probably haven't aged the most amazingly, but it's still just such a fun series. If you like urban fantasy romance, and any of that calls to you, you should definitely try them out. They are massive series. I think Anita Blake is up to book 30 is coming out in November, and then Mary Gentry is up to book 9, but she's been kind of stuck on that one for a while. So there are a lot of books, but that's a blessing. Because if you love the world, you just gotta have all these adventures. So you should definitely try it. Then up next is Steno, which is To Break. And so for this one, I'm gonna recommend you a book or series that made me cry or broke me. With the hyperbole of the kids these days. I feel so old sometimes. So one that like broke me figuratively speaking is the Shadow of the Fox trilogy by Julie Kagawa. The first 2 books felt very much like a fun, rompy, like almost Inuyasha, like anime vibes, kind of just spelunking around a fantasy version of Japan. But then book 3, there were some moments in it where I was like, no, no way. And I was like, oh my God, no. So it is really, really good. It is a YA fantasy series, so if you're one of those people like, YA, then maybe don't read it. But if you like fun, and you like kind of Japanese mythology, and you want a surprisingly dark, twisty, turny time in book 3, after getting lulled into a false sense of security, then I would say check it out. And the only book that I can remember actually ever making me cry that haunts me to this day, even though I read it back in like junior high, that is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. That is a nonfiction story about, in the 90s, there was a expedition team that was on Mount Everest, and they got stuck in a blizzard, and many of them died. And so it is a nonfiction recounting of like what happened to them. And there's one scene in particular with the man by the oxygen tanks, which if you know, you know, and it it still haunts me to this day, like 20 years later. So if you want to cry, maybe pick up Into Thin Air. Then up next is Pyrata, which is To Burn. And so for this one, I'm gonna recommend you a book or series that I really like the romance or spice in, and it just does it for me. And so for this one, I'm gonna say The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. There's a lot of YA on this list, which maybe I've just been having more fun with it lately. I don't really know. But The Infernal Devices is the second series, if you will, in the larger Shadowhunters world. There's the original Mortal Instruments trilogy. Then there's the second part of that series of the Mortal Instruments that is the books 4, 5, and 6 that were written later. And they were written kind of interspersed with the Infernal Devices. So if you want the ultimate reading experience where you get to see all of the crossovers across time, then you want to make sure that you look up the publication order and kind of bounce back and forth between books 4, 5, and 6 in the Mortal Instruments and the Infernal Devices trilogy, because they will kind of cross-spoil each other. But if you just want to jump straight into the Infernal Devices because the Mortal Instruments doesn't call to you, that is also totally fine. Mortal Instruments is kind of this, I'm terrible with my like English time periods. I don't know if it's Edwardian or Victorian, but it's like old-timey England and it's kind of Buffy-esque, and it's just so much fun. And it is the only love triangle that I've actually found really, really quite compelling and was really there for. And Jem is a literal gem, so we love him, we stan him. And if you haven't read The Infernal Devices and you like any amount of romance, then I don't know what you're waiting for. You should definitely pick it up ASAP. Then up next, we have Herena, which is To Give. And this is gonna be a book or series that you'd like to give to all of your family and friends. And so one of my favorite series of all time that pretty much nobody has ever read, and I try to keep convincing all of my booktube friends to give it a shot, and they haven't. But hopefully someday they will, and that is The War of the Spider Queen. This is a set of 6 books in the Forgotten Realms world, which if you don't know what the Forgotten Realms is, I have a whole video that I'll link for you about where you can start and what you can jump in, where you can jump into the Forgotten Realms and kind of what it is. But The War of the Spider Queen is this overarching story from R.A. Salvatore, which is the author of the Drizzt saga, which many people have heard of and is kind of the only series people think of when they think of the Forgotten Realms. but each book in this 6-book series is written by a different author that is really prevalent in their writing in the Forgotten Realms. So it gives you kind of a taster of the different authors from the Forgotten Realms while also having this more cohesive story. And basically in the War of the Spider Queen, we are following this evil drow civilization which lives in this subterranean cavern city known as Menzoberranzan. And these dark elves worship this demon goddess known as Lolth, the Spider Queen. And she obviously is quite malicious. And so the society that follows her is very backstabby and conniving and manipulative, and it's completely matriarchal, led by these priestesses of this demon goddess. And one day, Lolth falls mysteriously silent, and in the Forgotten Realms, these priestesses have to pray daily to get their magic powers from their goddess patron. So when she falls silent, they start losing their magic, and their magic is what they use to keep this kind of stranglehold on their matriarchy. And so they send these different drow on this expedition to the plane in which this demon goddess lives to find out what happened. And obviously, since we're in this kind of manipulative, evil society, it's kind of this weird ragtag group where there is some amount of friendship, but there's also rivalry, and each one of them is kind of looking out for themselves. And so if you're really into that kind of morally gray, but tons of magic, I would say The War of the Spider Queen is so good. And if you love it, there is a follow-up trilogy that follows one of the characters after the events of the War of the Spider Queen. So there's a follow-up trilogy if you're interested. But I just wish everybody would read it and talk to me about it. Then up next is going to be the spicy one. So this is Tosal, which is to confine. And this is a book or series that you want to put in confinement. And for me, we all know, it's no mystery, I hated House of Sky and Breath, which is book 2 in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. That book needs to be put on a timeout. It needs to be locked up. It is a travesty. I have a whole 30-minute rant review on that book. So if you want to know my full spoiler-filled ranty thoughts when I finish that book, I'll link that video for you. But House of Sky and Breath needs to be locked up. It is a crime. And then the final prompt, just to kind of end it on a positive note, is Athera, which is to grow. And so for this one, it's name a book or series that helped you grow or expanded your mind. And so I don't really tend to read for that reason. I'm not a really theme-driven reader or anything like that. But one book that I do remember reading that I found really interesting just from a different perspective was Letters to a Young Scientist by Edward O. Wilson. And this is a nonfiction book of, it's an old dusty white dinosaur from scientific academia, but he's kind of reflecting on how he got where he is and kind of giving advice to future generations of scientists. So I think it's interesting in kind of two ways, because you can, one, kind of see the privilege in academia of being a white male, but you can also get some kind of interesting advice and perspective on somebody who's been in the business of science or the academia of science for a long period of time. This book is quite well renowned. I think it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, so it's also quite short. And so even if you're not a sciencey person, but you want to kind of get a glimpse into what it's like to be a scientist, this book is really approachable, really accessible, and I think it is really interesting. So I think it's really worth giving a shot if you're at all interested. But that does it for this original book recommendation tag. I hope you had as much fun watching it as I had fun making these different prompts. And if you are a bookish creator, then I tag you, so please do this tag. I try to come up with prompts that are kind of different from what you see in most of the different tag videos out there. And so I hope you really enjoyed this. And if you just want to pop down in those comments and maybe answer one of these prompts for yourself and let me know what you would pick for maybe, why don't you tell me which book you would pick for the to heal prompt? So let me know a book that healed you, gave you catharsis, or gave you escape at a time that you needed it. I would love to hear from you. If you just want to leave an emoji, maybe leave the little wizards since we're talking Shades of Magic. That will do it for today's video. So please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!